The sky above New York City turned dark purple when the aliens arrived, and everyone stopped what they were doing to stare upward at the massive ships that blocked out the sun and made the whole world feel small and helpless for the first time in human history. Luna Blackwood stood on the roof of an old building watching the alien fleet with eyes that had seen many things over her long life, and she knew this day would come because the stars had whispered warnings to her for decades, and now the time for hiding was almost over. The biggest alien ship opened like a metal flower and projected a huge image into the sky, showing a creature with 4 eyes and clicking mouthparts that made sounds no human throat could copy, but technology translated its words into every language on Earth at the same time. Humans of Earth, you have one day to surrender to the Galactic Council, or we will take your planet by force and make you our slaves, because you are weak and primitive, and we are strong and advanced. So make your choice now. People in the streets started screaming and running while others took out their phones to record the moment that changed everything, and governments around the world went into emergency meetings trying to figure out what to do about this threat from the stars. Luna touched the scales of the small dragon perched on her shoulder, and Ember purred like a cat, sensing her companion's worry, but also her determination to protect this world that had been their home for so long, even if most humans never knew they existed. In the Pentagon, Admiral Kate Morrison stood tall in front of the Emergency Council and said, "We do not surrender to anyone, and we will fight with everything we have, because that is what humans do when someone tries to take our freedom away from us." The other military leaders agreed, and within minutes the message went out to every military base and every soldier preparing for a war unlike anything Earth had ever faced before, against an enemy from beyond the stars with technology they could not understand. Luna watched from her hidden place as humans prepared for war, and she smiled because they did not know about the secret defenders who lived among them and had been waiting centuries for this moment when Earth would need its magical protectors to stand beside its technological ones. She walked down the stairs of the building, passing through shadows that seemed to bend around her and making no sound as she moved, because elves had always been good at staying hidden when they wanted to, and she had been hiding for a very long time. In Central Park, other beings stirred in places humans never looked because the old magic still lived there, and creatures of legend felt the call to defend their adopted home from these invaders who thought Earth would be easy to conquer. A homeless man who slept under the bridge was not really a man at all, but a werewolf who had been watching over this park for 50 years, and his eyes glowed yellow in the darkness as he sensed the coming storm and prepared to call his pack. The old woman who fed pigeons every morning was actually a witch whose family had come to America during the Salem trials, and she felt the ley lines under the city pulse with power. As Earth itself prepared to defend its children, Luna met them in the secret places where magic folk gathered, and they all knew without words what needed to be done, because this was the moment their kind had been preparing for since they first went into hiding when humans forgot about magic. Ember grew larger on Luna's shoulder, becoming the size of a large dog, and her scales shifted from black to deep purple, matching the alien sky as her ancient power awakened and remembered what it meant to be a dragon in times of war. The aliens gave Earth one day to decide, but they did not know that decision had already been made, not just by human governments, but by every magical being who called this planet home and loved it enough to fight for it. President Diana Foster spoke to the world from the White House, and her voice was strong and clear as she said, "Earth does not surrender to bullies, whether they come from across the ocean or across the galaxy, and we will defend our home with our last breath." People cheered in the streets, and military forces mobilized, and the whole planet united against a common enemy for the first time in history. But the real preparation happened in shadows, where ancient powers woke from long sleep. Luna stood on Liberty Island looking at the statue that symbolized freedom and hope, while Ember circled overhead, grown to the size of a small plane and breathing smoke that sparkled with colors humans had never seen before. The alien commander Vexor watched from his ship and laughed because these primitives had no idea what they faced, and their little weapons would be like toys against the might of the Galactic Council that had conquered 10,000 worlds. But Luna knew something the aliens did not know, and that was that Earth had never been defenseless and had always had guardians watching from the shadows. And now those guardians would show the galaxy why this little blue planet had survived when so many others had fallen. As the hours counted down to the alien deadline, more magical beings revealed themselves to trusted humans, and alliances formed between technology and magic that would have seemed impossible just days before but now felt like destiny. Luna gathered the most powerful magic users in Times Square as midnight approached, and they began weaving spells that had not been used since the last time Earth faced extinction, and the air itself seemed to sing with power. "The humans have given their answer," Luna said to the assembled creatures of myth and legend, "and now we add our voice to theirs, because Earth is our home too, and we will not let it fall to these invaders." When the deadline came, and Earth broadcast its response to the alien fleet, it was not just human voices that spoke, but the roar of dragons and howl of werewolves and the singing of elven magic, all united in one simple message: come and try. The alien attack began at dawn with beams of green plasma raining down from the sky like deadly fireworks. But instead of destroying buildings and killing people, the attacks just stopped in midair and turned into pretty light shows that made children laugh instead of cry. High Chancellor Vexor screamed in his command chair, because this was impossible. And these primitive humans should not have shields that could stop the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. But there they were making his mighty fleet look foolish. What he could not see was Luna standing on top of the Empire State Building with her arms raised and silver light flowing from her fingers as she wove protection spells older than human civilization, while other elves did the same from rooftops across the world. Captain Amy Chen led her squadron of experimental fighters up through the atmosphere and into space, where the real battle would begin, and her heart raced with fear and excitement as she prepared to fight enemies that should have been impossible to beat. All pilots, remember, these aliens think we are nothing but cave people with sticks, so let us show them what humans can do when we get angry and work together, because today we fight for everyone. We love down there on Earth. The human fighters were fast and brave, but the alien drones outnumbered them 100 to 1, and it looked like the battle would end quickly until shapes emerged from clouds that had not been there moments before. Dragons of every color and size filled the sky, breathing fire that burned hotter than stars and melting alien ships like they were made of butter, while their riders shot arrows that somehow went through shields like they did not exist. Private Lisa Thompson watched from her position on the ground as a golden dragon the size of a house flew past with an elf woman on its back, shooting a bow that glowed with blue light, and she knew the world would never be the same. The aliens had prepared for missiles and lasers and all the weapons they expected humans to have. But they had not prepared for magic and creatures from legend, working together with human technology in ways that should not have been possible. Ember had grown to the size of a whale, and Luna rode on her back as they dove through the alien formation, breathing purple fire that did not just burn metal but seemed to eat through reality itself, leaving nothing behind. In London, werewolves ran through the streets faster than cars, hunting down alien ground troops that had landed thinking the city would be defenseless, but finding instead that every shadow held teeth and claws and ancient fury. Grace Miller had been a librarian for 30 years, and everyone thought she was just a nice old lady who loved books, but when aliens burst into her library, she changed into a 9-foot-tall werewolf and showed them why their armor was not enough. The aliens' weapons were designed to fight technology, and they worked well against tanks and planes, but they did nothing against a werewolf's claws or a dragon's teeth, or the spells that witches cast from their hiding places. In Tokyo, a vampire who had been a salaryman for 20 years moved through the alien lines faster than their sensors could track and drank their strange blood, which tasted like copper and electricity, while his victims fell silently. The battle raged for hours, and the aliens kept sending more troops down, thinking they could overwhelm Earth through numbers, but every wave met the same fate as magic, and technology worked together in deadly harmony. Helen Wright had run a bakery in London for 40 years and made the best scones in the city. But when aliens tried to take her shop, she showed them why witches had been feared throughout history by turning their own weapons into flowers. Luna felt the strain of maintaining the shields over multiple cities and knew she could not keep it up forever. But she did not need to, because the first part of the plan was working and the aliens were getting frustrated and making mistakes. Vexor could not understand what was happening because his scanners showed no technology that should be able to do these things, but his ships kept exploding and His troops kept dying to creatures that should not exist according to all logic. The council had banned magic thousands of years ago and destroyed all who practiced it on every world they conquered, but they had never come to Earth during those purges, and so the old ways had survived and grown strong. As the sun reached its highest point, the tide of battle turned completely, and alien ships began retreating back to orbit while their ground forces found themselves hunted by things that moved through shadows and struck without warning. Admiral Morrison watched the tactical displays in amazement, as enemy forces that should have crushed Earth in hours were instead running away, and she realized that the stories about things that go bump in the night might have been true all along. Luna landed Ember on the aircraft carrier, where human and magical forces were coordinating their efforts, and she walked into the command center like she belonged there, which surprised everyone, except those who had started to understand. We cannot let them regroup in orbit, Luna told the Admiral, and we need to press our advantage now while they are confused and afraid, because fear is a weapon too, and right now they fear us more than we fear them. The Admiral nodded and gave orders for all forces to pursue, and suddenly human pilots found themselves flying alongside dragons, while ground troops advanced with werewolf packs and witch covens provided magical support. In Moscow, a group of young soldiers stared in shock as their babushka, who made them soup every Sunday, floated past their position glowing with power and throwing lightning at alien tanks while humming an old Russian lullaby. The aliens tried to retreat to their ships but found that dragons could fly in space just fine, and their fire burned even without air, while human fighters armed with new weapons designed overnight by combining science and sorcery pressed the attack. By sunset of the first day, a third of the alien fleet was gone, and the rest huddled in high orbit, trying to understand how a primitive world had done the impossible, and wondering what other surprises Earth might have. Waiting, Luna stood with Ember on the observation deck of the U carrier, watching the debris of alien ships burn up in the atmosphere like shooting stars, and she knew this was just the beginning of a war that would change the galaxy forever. The humans had fought well and proven they would not surrender, but now they knew they were not alone on their world, and that knowledge would change everything about how they saw themselves and their place in the universe. Tomorrow the aliens would come back with new strategies and more ships, but tonight Earth celebrated its first victory with humans and magical beings standing together under stars that no longer seemed quite so cold and distant. Vexor sent messages back to the Galactic Council warning them that Earth had forbidden magic and creatures that should not exist, but the Council did not believe him because they had grown arrogant in their power over millennia. Luna smiled as she read the intercepted messages, because she knew the aliens' greatest weakness was their certainty that they understood everything and their refusal to believe in things that did not fit their ordered view of reality. The first blood had been drawn, and it belonged to the invaders, who learned that Earth was not the easy target they expected, but a world of wonders and terrors that would fight to the last breath to stay free. High Chancellor Vexor stood before the Galactic Council hologram projection, and his 4 eyes blazed with rage as he tried to explain how a backwards planet had destroyed 30% of his invasion fleet using impossible methods that defied all known science. The council members did not want to believe his reports about dragons and magic, because they had spent 10,000 years convincing themselves such things were myths, and admitting they were wrong would shake the foundation of their empire. They dare use the forbidden arts against us. Vexor snarled and his mandibles clicked in agitation as he showed footage of dragons breathing fire that melted ships designed to withstand the heart of stars and elves shooting arrows through shields deep beneath New York City, in caverns that existed outside normal space and time. Luna called together the Shadow Parliament, where representatives of every hidden species on Earth gathered around a table carved from a single piece of meteorite. The werewolf Alpha Fenris stood 7 feet tall even in his human form, and his voice rumbled like distant thunder as he spoke about how his packs had hunted alien scouts through the forests and mountains of North America. The humans fight bravely, but they cannot win this war alone, and we must reveal ourselves fully if we are to save this world that has sheltered us for so long. Even as its people forgot we existed among them, a vampire elder named Marcus, who had lived through the fall of Rome, nodded his pale head in agreement and spoke of how his covens had been striking at alien supply lines and communication posts under cover of darkness. Luna listened to each report while Ember sat coiled around her chair, having shrunk to the size of a large cat, and her ancient eyes saw patterns forming that reminded her of prophecies spoken when the world was young. The Fey Queen Silvermoon stepped forward, and her voice was like wind chimes as she told how her people had been confusing alien sensors with glamours and leading whole battalions into trap after trap in the deep forests. We have hidden for too long and let humans think we were only stories told to children. But now the universe itself threatens our home, and we must stand in the light once more, no matter the cost to our secrecy. The decision was unanimous, and within hours magical beings began revealing themselves to their human neighbors in ways that should have caused panic, but instead brought hope to a world under siege from the stars. In London, Grace Miller knocked on the door of every flat in her building and showed her neighbors her true form, explaining that she had been protecting them for years and would continue to do so against any enemy. The old woman, Helen Wright, gathered the children she had taught to bake over the years and showed them real magic, not just making bread rise but making flowers bloom in winter and lights dance without electricity. President Diana Foster addressed the world again, but this time she was joined by representatives of the magical races, and her voice only shook a little as she introduced humanity to their oldest neighbors and newest allies, people of Earth. I stand before you with truths that would have seemed impossible a week ago. But we are not alone on this planet, and we never have been for living beside us all along, have been the beings of myth and legend. The revelation should have broken society, but humans had just seen aliens try to conquer them. So finding out their neighbor was a vampire or their teacher was an elf seemed almost reasonable by comparison, and most adapted quickly. Luna appeared on every screen in the world, her inhuman beauty undeniable as she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of centuries and explained how magical beings had protected Earth from threats humanity never knew existed. We are your neighbors and friends, and we have walked among you for thousands of years, keeping the darkness at bay. But now a new darkness comes from the stars, and we must fight it together as one people of Earth. The integration happened faster than anyone expected as human soldiers learned to fight alongside werewolf packs and scientists worked with witches to understand how magic and technology could enhance each other in ways both had thought impossible. In Japan, shrine maidens who were actually kitsune taught human pilots how to see through illusions and dodge attacks that seemed to come from nowhere, while dragon riders showed tank crews how to use terrain in 3 dimensions. The aliens attacked again 3 days later, but this time they met a united Earth where human technology and magical power worked as one, and their advantages in numbers and firepower meant less against an enemy that refused to fight. Fair Captain Amy Chen flew her fighter through a gap in space created by elven mages and found herself behind enemy lines where she unleashed missiles enhanced with dragon fire that burned through shields and armor like tissue paper. On the ground, Private Lisa Thompson fought beside a werewolf pack and discovered that her rifle worked much better when a witch had blessed the bullets and that alien armor designed to stop lasers did nothing against enchanted lead. The battles raged across the globe, but now Earth was winning more than losing, and alien commanders who had expected easy victory found themselves trapped in a nightmare where the very planet seemed to fight against them. Luna coordinated the magical defenses from her position in Times Square, where ley lines converged and gave her access to power that made the air itself sing, and she wove spells that turned alien weapons into useless metal ember. Had grown to her war form the size of a commercial airliner, and she led wings of dragons in attacks on alien capital ships, while her fire burned through dimensions, leaving wounds in space that took hours to heal. The Shadow Parliament met daily, now no longer in secret, but in the UN building where human and magical leaders planned strategy together and learned from each other in ways that would reshape both societies. Forever, Vexor watched his forces crumble and could not understand how. This was happening because the Council had conquered 10,000 worlds and never faced resistance like this, where the enemy used powers that should not exist. He ordered his scientists to find ways to counter magic, but they had no frame of reference, because the Council had destroyed all knowledge of such things, believing that what they could not understand could not be allowed to exist. In the ruins of Los Angeles, where aliens had managed to establish a foothold, they found themselves under constant attack by ghosts and spirits awakened by necromancers who showed them that death was not always the end. A young soldier named Maria Rodriguez discovered she had witch blood when her squad was pinned down, and she instinctively cast a shield, spell her grandmother had sung to her as a child, saving her entire unit from plasma fire. The war had become something neither side had expected, with battles fought in multiple dimensions and strategies that mixed starship tactics with spellcraft, while the galaxy watched in amazement and growing fear. Luna knew they were winning, but also that this was only the intermediate phase because the Council would not accept defeat and would send their entire fleet if necessary. But Earth had one, more secret that even she had kept hidden. As the third week of war ended and alien forces retreated to regroup again, humanity and its magical allies stood together stronger than ever and ready for whatever came next. Because they had learned the greatest truth of all, Earth was not just another world to be conquered, but a fortress of life and magic that had been preparing for this moment since the first thinking being looked up at the stars and wondered what waited in the darkness between them. The hidden war was over, and the true war for the fate of the galaxy was about to begin with Earth at its center, as the last free world where magic and science stood together against the sterile tyranny of the Council. The war had lasted 3 months, and Earth had proven itself unconquerable. But the cost was terrible, with cities in ruins and millions dead, while the Galactic Council kept sending wave after wave of reinforcements from across their vast empire. Luna stood before the united command of Earth, looking exhausted but determined, as she prepared to reveal the last great secret that even most magical beings did not know about their world and its place in the cosmic order. General Rebecca Hayes studied, the elf woman who had become the bridge between two worlds, and asked the question everyone was thinking about: whether Earth could survive if the Council sent their full fleet of 1 million ships. "We cannot win through strength alone," Luna said, and her voice carried ancient wisdom as she began to weave illusions in the air, showing images of dragons larger than any on Earth, whose scales contained what looked like captured galaxies. She told them the true history of the universe, how dragons had once ruled all of creation with wisdom and power that made the current Council look like children playing with dangerous toys they did not understand. The Council rose to power only after the dragons vanished in what they called the Great Silence, when every dragon in the galaxy simply disappeared, leaving behind only eggs hidden on remote worlds like seeds, waiting for the right moment. Ember is not just my companion, but the last daughter of Izara, the Star Render, who was the greatest of all dragon lords, and she has been sending a signal since this war began that should be impossible for anyone to answer. President Foster leaned forward in her chair and asked what kind of signal could reach beings that had been gone for 10,000 years, and Luna smiled with a mix of hope and uncertainty as she explained the nature of dragons. Dragons exist partially outside normal space and time, which is why their fire can burn through dimensions and their size can change at will. And the Dragon Lords were said to have transcended physical reality entirely. If they still exist somewhere beyond our understanding, then Ember's call might reach them. But this is a gambit, not a certainty, because we are betting the survival of Earth on legends that were old when your species was young. The room fell silent as leaders absorbed this information and realized they were placing their hope in beings that might be myths even to the mythical creatures now fighting alongside humanity. In the greatest war ever known, Admiral Morrison broke the silence by standing up and saying that Earth had already done the impossible multiple times, and if their choice was certain defeat or possible salvation through dragon magic, then the choice was clear. Over the following days, Ember grew larger than anyone had seen her before, until she was the size of a small mountain, and her call changed from something heard to something felt in the bones of every living thing on Earth. The signal was not words, but pure emotion and need, carrying the message that the children of dragons were in danger, and that the ancient enemy had returned in new form to threaten the last refuge of magic in the galaxy. Luna and the most powerful magic users on Earth worked together to amplify the signal, creating a ritual that had not been performed since the dragons first left, and required sacrifice from every magical being who gave part of their essence. Even humans felt the call in their dreams, and many reported visions of vast beings made of starlight and shadow, moving through spaces between spaces toward a small blue world that cried out for its parents to come home. Vexor felt it too, and for the first time in his life, knew real fear. because the council had always told themselves the dragons were gone forever. But deep in their genetic memory, every species remembered when gods flew between stars. He ordered his full fleet to attack immediately before whatever Earth was summoning could arrive. And 1,000,000 ships began converging on the solar system in the largest armada ever assembled in galactic history. Earth prepared for the final battle with humans and magical beings united as never before and weapons that combined the best of both worlds while children learned shield spells in school and soldiers carried enchanted ammunition. Captain Amy Chen now commanded a mixed squadron of human fighters and dragon riders, and she led them in desperate holding actions against the advanced scouts of the approaching fleet, buying time for Luna's gambit to work. The first signs came as ripples in space itself that made instruments go wild, and reality seemed to hiccup as something vast approached, not through normal space but through dimensions that physics said should not exist. Then they appeared, and every being on Earth fell to their knees, not from fear, but from awe, as dragons the size of continents materialized around the planet, and their eyes held the birth and death of galaxies. The Dragon Lords had returned, and they were nothing like the stories because the stories had been told by beings too small to comprehend what they truly were, and now they looked upon what the galaxy had become in their absence. The lead dragon was so vast that Earth itself looked like a marble beside it, and when it spoke, every mind in the solar system heard its words that rang with disappointment at what they found upon their return home. Little conquerors, you have attacked our children and brought war to the last garden we planted before we ascended, and this displeases us greatly, for we had hoped your kind would have grown wise in our absence. Vexor 1,000,000 ships that had seemed unstoppable now looked like insects before gods, and he watched in horror as dragons that defied all understanding began to move through his fleet as if it was not there. Ships were not destroyed but simply ceased to exist, as dragons breathed not fire but pure entropy that unmade things at the fundamental level and returned them to the potential they had been before becoming real. Some dragons were kind and merely sent ships back to their homeworlds instantly with crews intact, but memories altered to forget the location of Earth, while others were less forgiving and left only cosmic dust. Luna watched from Earth as the power she had hoped for but never truly believed would come reshaped the galaxy in moments, and she felt Ember purr with joy at seeing her ancestors even in their transcended forms. The Dragon Lords examined Earth like gardeners checking on a prize flower and found it damaged but still beautiful, and they were pleased that humans and magical beings had learned to work together, as they had hoped. One dragon, smaller than the rest but still the size of the moon, came close to Earth and spoke directly to Luna, recognizing her as the keeper who had watched over their child for all these centuries of waiting. "You have done well, daughter of stars and keeper of the last egg. And now we offer Earth a choice that no world has been given since we left the physical realm 10,000 years ago when we grew beyond matter." The choice was simple in words but vast in implications, because the Dragon Lords offered Earth membership in the Table of Worlds, which was the council that existed before the Galactic Council, and included beings that had transcended physical existence. It would mean Earth would be protected forever, but also that humans and magical beings would have responsibilities to help guide younger species and prevent the kind of tyranny the Galactic Council had become over time. As the Dragon Lords waited for an answer, Vexor and his surviving followers fled to the edges of the galaxy, spreading word that the ancient gods had returned and that Earth was under their protection now. And always Luna stood with Ember, who had returned to her smaller size, and together they spoke for Earth, accepting the honor and burden of becoming part of something greater, while still remaining true to what made their world special. The gambit had worked beyond all hopes, and Earth had not just survived, but become the center of a new age where magic and science would work together to create wonders and protect the freedom of all thinking beings. The Dragon Lords departed as mysteriously as they had come, but their presence could still be felt watching from beyond space and time, ready to return if their children were threatened again by those who would conquer rather than create. 5 years had passed since the Dragon Lords returned and changed everything, and Earth had transformed from a small blue marble at the edge of the galaxy into the beating heart of a new interstellar civilization built on cooperation instead of Conquest Luna stood in Unity Plaza, the monument built where Times Square used to be, and watched children of all species play together, while their parents discussed trade agreements and cultural exchanges that would have been impossible before the war. The Galactic Council had dissolved within days of the Dragon Lord's appearance, and its member species had scattered, with some begging Earth for forgiveness, while others retreated to distant corners of space to nurse their wounded pride ember. Now preferred to stay the size of a large dog, and spent her days playing with human children who had grown up in a world where dragons were friends, and magic was as normal as mathematics in their daily education. President Foster had been re-elected in the first interspecies election, where humans, elves, werewolves, and every other Earth citizen could vote, and she worked with the Shadow Parliament to create laws that protected everyone equally. The monument at the center of Unity Plaza listed every name of those who died in the war, both human and magical, and water from every ocean and soil from every continent had been mixed into its foundation to represent their united world. Admiral Morrison had become Earth's first ambassador to the galaxy, and she traveled with a mixed crew of humans and magical beings, showing other worlds that diversity was strength, and that cooperation could achieve what force could not. Captain Amy Chen commanded the United Fleet that patrolled the solar system and trained pilots from dozens of species who came to Earth to learn how to blend technology and magic in ways their worlds had never imagined possible. Private Lisa Thompson had discovered she had elven ancestry and now taught at the military academy, where she helped young soldiers understand that courage came in many forms, and that the greatest strength was knowing when not to fight. The old library, where Grace Miller had revealed herself as a werewolf, had become a school where children learned about all the hidden history of Earth, and she still told stories, but now they were true tales of heroism and unity. Helen Wright had opened a new bakery that served customers from across the galaxy, and her recipes combining human cooking with magical ingredients had become famous enough that beings traveled light years just to taste them. Earth had become a pilgrimage site for those seeking to understand how a single world had stood against the might of the Galactic Council and won through the power of unity and the return of beings thought lost. Forever ships arrived daily, carrying refugees from worlds still recovering from Council rule, and Earth welcomed them all because Luna and the other leaders remembered what it was like to hide and wanted no being to feel that fear again. The Dragon Lords had left representatives behind, beings of immense power, but more approachable size, who sat on the table of worlds and helped guide the galaxy toward a future where might did not make right, and diversity was celebrated. Marcus the Vampire Elder had become the night shift coordinator for the orbital defense platforms, and his ability to work without rest made him perfect for ensuring Earth was never caught off guard. Again, by threats from the stars, Fenris and his werewolf packs had formed ranger units that patrolled the wilderness areas of Earth, protecting both the natural world and the hidden places where magic was strongest from those who might exploit them. Fae had opened doorways between Earth and their realm, allowing trade in wonders that enriched both worlds, and Queen Silvermoon had become close friends with President Foster. Despite their very different perspectives on time, Luna spent her days teaching the next generation of bridge builders, those who could walk between the worlds of science and magic, and help others understand that the two were not opposites, but different faces of the same truth. Vexor had been captured trying to rally the remnants of the Council for revenge and now lived under house arrest on Earth, where he was required to attend classes on ethics and cooperation taught by those he had tried to conquer. Some of his species had adapted to the new reality, and their young attended Earth schools where they learned about respect and freedom, while their parents worked to make amends for the damage their people had caused. The Table of Worlds met quarterly on Earth because it had become the neutral ground, where old enemies could become new allies and where the mistakes of the past could be acknowledged and learned from. Without endless revenge, Earth had developed new technologies by studying dragonfire and elven magic, creating ships that could fold space and weapons that protected rather than destroyed, and medical devices that healed both body and spirit. Children born after the war grew up in a universe fundamentally different from their parents, where magic was real and aliens were neighbors, and Earth was not a backwater but the example other worlds tried to follow. The memorial services held each year brought beings from across the galaxy to remember those who had died so that freedom could live, and to renew their commitment to never let tyranny rise again in any form. Luna often visited schools to tell the story of how Earth had stood alone against impossible odds, and won not through superior weapons, but through the courage to trust ancient allies and believe in impossible things. She would bring Ember, who would grow just large enough to be impressive, but not frightening. And the dragon would let children pet her scales, while Luna explained how even the smallest person could change the course of history. The galaxy had learned that Earth was special not because of its location or resources, but because it was where beings had learned to see past their differences and find strength in what made them unique. Trade flowed freely through Earth ports, bringing prosperity and culture from 1,000 worlds, while Earth exported not just goods but ideas about freedom and cooperation that slowly changed how species interacted. Military forces still existed, but they were international and interspecies, designed to protect rather than conquer, and many former soldiers had become teachers and healers, spreading Earth methods across the galaxy. The magic that had been hidden for so long was now studied openly in universities where quantum physicists worked with wizards to understand the fundamental forces of reality and push the boundaries of the possible. Young people dreamed of joining exploration ships that searched for other pockets of magic in the galaxy and helped worlds that had been stripped of wonder by the Council to rediscover their own mythical heritage. The story of Earthstand had become legend, told in different ways on different worlds, but always with the same message that freedom was worth fighting for, and that unity could overcome any tyranny. Luna watched the sunset from Unity Plaza, painting the sky in colors that reminded her of dragonfire and alien auroras, while children of a dozen species played around the memorial that stood for all they had protected. Ember curled up beside her as they watched the first stars appear, including the orbital habitats where former enemies now lived and worked together, building a future none of them could have imagined. Before the war, tomorrow, there would be new challenges and new wonders to discover. But tonight Earth rested secure in the knowledge that it had been tested by the greatest threat the galaxy could offer, and had emerged stronger than before. The little blue marble that the Galactic Council had dismissed, as primitive, had become the heart of a new civilization, one that valued diversity over conformity and freedom over control and magic over the mundane. And in classrooms across the galaxy, teachers told their students the story of how Earth had replied to the demand for surrender with 3 simple words that changed history and proved that some things were worth fighting for. Come and try, they had said, and when the galaxy had come, Earth had shown them why free beings would always triumph over tyrants and why magic and wonder would always find a way to survive and grow. The age of conquest was over, and the age of wonders had begun with Earth as its guiding star, a small world that had reminded the universe that the greatest power was not in weapons but in the unity of those who refused to kneel.